The heavy oak door splinters under the bailiff's boot, exposing the hearth's warmth to the freezing November rain. It is 1395 in the ward of Cheap, London. In medieval Europe, the brutality visited upon cheating wives often bypassed the courtroom to explode directly on the cobblestones. A woman is dragged into the mud, not by strangers, but by neighbors who broke bread with her the night before. The bailiff produces the iron shears. They are heavy, cold, and rusted, tools meant for sheep, now raised against a human scalp. This jagged metal becomes the symbol of her systematic dismantling. Why did this specific accusation ignite the ward so violently? And what buried ledger suggests this theater of shame was never truly about infidelity? The sharpest blade is not the one that draws blood. If you enjoy these dark histories, leave a like and subscribe and comment below where you're listening from. And now, back to the story. The procession begins not with the slamming of a dungeon door, but with the deafening clatter of iron pans and cracked basins. The rough music, or charivari, erupts around her, a discordant symphony designed to fracture the spirit before the body is ever touched. She is stripped of her outer garments, leaving only a thin linen shift to defend against the biting wind. The iron shears have done their work. Her hair, once a distinct marker of her status and soul, now lies trampled in the mud of the ward of Cheap. Now, the institutional control asserts itself. She is no longer a citizen. She is a canvas for the city's terrified morality. A hood of striped ray cloth is forced over her shorn scalp. It is the standardized uniform of the outcast, a visual branding that screams "whore" more loudly than any town crier ever could. She is made to walk. The route is not random, it is a calculated geography of shame. They march her through the busiest markets, past the guild hall, past the very church steps where she was wed. Every step is an equation solved by the authorities to maximize exposure. They do not need to bind her hands with heavy rope. She is bound by the collective, suffocating gaze of the parish. The crowd throws refuse, rotting vegetables, butcher's offal, handfuls of freezing mud. Yet, amidst the chaos, a quiet phenomenon occurs. She straightens her spine. She fixes her eyes on the gray slate horizon of the rooftops, refusing to meet the jeers of the men who once tipped their hats to her. She does not weep. This silence is her only remaining possession, a private rebellion against the script they have written for her destruction. Silence is the one wall they cannot breach. She is led toward the thews, a pillory constructed specifically for women. It stands in the square, the wood dark and greasy with the sweat and fear of those who stood there before. Here, the procession halts. A clerk from the ecclesiastical court approaches, his robes dry and clean amidst the filth. He leans in close, his voice a soft whisper under the roar of the mob. He offers a reprieve. He suggests that if she names the others, for surely, he implies, a woman does not stray without a network of vice. The hours in the pillory might be shortened. He hints at a transfer to a convent, a quiet disappearance instead of this public dismantling. It is a poison mercy. To speak is to validate their authority, to agree that she is broken. The mercy is simply a different cage, one built of cold stone walls and endless penance rather than public mockery. The striped hood scratches her neck, rough wool against raw skin. She realizes the clerk does not want the truth. He wants submission. He wants the ledger of sin to balance, and her voice is the ink he requires. She looks at the wooden frame of the pillory, then back at the clerk. The air smells of charcoal smoke and unwashed bodies. She tightens her jaw. The price of their mercy is her complete erasure, and she will not pay it. The trap snaps shut when you accept the bait. The mechanism of the pillory is simple, brutal geometry. 2 planks of seasoned oak clamp the neck and wrists, forcing the body into a permanent bowl. It is a posture of forced contrition, designed to make the spine scream after the first hour. In the ward of Cheap, the rain turns to sleet, slicking the cobblestones and soaking the striped ray cloth hood until it hangs heavy as lead against her face. The bailiff returns. The mob has thinned, leaving only the stragglers and the drunkards, but the legal machinery does not sleep. He holds a parchment, a formal confession pre-written by the ecclesiastical court. The condition is stated openly now, stripped of the earlier pretense of mercy. If she signs or makes her mark, She admits to a pollution of the bloodline. This legal fiction allows the church to annul the marriage instantly. She would be exiled to the liberty of the clink across the river, to vanish into the anonymous poverty of the brothel districts. If she refuses, she remains here until the common fame is satisfied, risking exposure to the deep winter night that kills as surely as the hangman. He holds the quill near her face. "Sign," he says, and the cold ends. She looks at the parchment, the ink blurring in the damp air. She looks at the bailiff. "The cold is yours," she whispers. It is a flat, rusted refusal. The body breaks long before the law is satisfied. The bailiff withdraws, taking the warmth of the lantern with him. The escalation begins. It is not a torture of hot irons, but of deprivation. The muscles in her back spasm and lock. Thirst becomes a physical weight in her throat. The silence of the square is heavier than the earlier noise. A stray dog sniffs at her shoes. This is the true test, the erosion of the self in the dark. But as the sensation leaves her fingers, a strange inversion takes hold. The iron shears took her hair, and the hood took her face, but the pillory grants her a terrible clarity. She realizes the true nature of the why. Through the gap in the wooden frame, she sees a figure watching from the shadow of an awning. It is her husband. He is not weeping. He is not raging. He is counting. Under the custom of London, a wife's dowry, her goods, her coin, her family's land, remains hers if the husband dies, or the marriage ends without cause. But a wife convicted of public adultery forfeits everything. The ledger balances perfectly. This was never about a lover, or a moment of passion, or the sanctity of the bedchamber. It was a liquidation of assets. The accusation of cheating was the key to unlock her inheritance and transfer it to his pocket. The price of his solvency is her total destruction. Understanding hardens her. The shivering stops, replaced by a hypothermic calm. The shame intended to crush her becomes armor. She is no longer a wife failing her duty, but a witness to a theft. She vows to outlast the night, not for redemption, but to deny him the satisfaction of her death in the frame. She breathes in the freezing air, sharp as glass, and holds it. Survival is the only revenge left to the condemned. The iron clamps release with a groan that mimics the sound of a dying animal. She falls from the pillory, her knees hitting the frozen mud of the square. The bailiff does not offer a hand. He simply turns his back, his duty discharged. The crowd has long since dispersed to their warm fires and morning labors, leaving her as a discarded husk in the gray light of dawn. She is free, technically, but in the eyes of the city, she is a ghost, haunting the streets she once walked as a wife. She does not flee to the river or the sanctuary of the church. Instead, she moves with the painful, stilted gait of the broken toward the alleyway behind the house that is no longer hers. The back door, the servant's entrance, is barred, but she knows the loose grate in the cellar foundation. She slides into the darkness, into the underbelly of the home she managed for a decade. The air here is thick with the smell of damp wool, sawdust, and the metallic tang of iron tools. She ascends the narrow stairs to the counting house. It is silent. Her husband sleeps upstairs, likely dreaming of the coin he has secured. On the heavy oak table lies the ledger, the master book of the household's fate. She opens it, her fingers numb and stained with the filth of the pillory. The pages crackle, dry and brittle. She traces the entries, moving backward from the date of her accusation. There it is. A single line of ink, hastily written but damning in its clarity. A massive debt to the Mercer's Guild, due on the feast of St. Martin, the very day she was dragged into the street. The numbers do not lie. The business was collapsing. Without the immediate liquidation of her dowry, the shop would have been seized, his reputation destroyed. The accusation of adultery was not a crime of passion. It was a necessary financial maneuver, timed to the hour. Gold weighs more than blood in a failing house. Beside the ledger sit the iron shears. They are cleaned now, wiped of the mud from the street, returned to their place as a tool of industry. She picks them up. The metal warms slightly in her hand. She does not go upstairs to exact a bloody revenge. The world would only see a mad woman murdering a righteous husband. Instead, she performs a quiet, wordless rite of memory. She opens the ledger to the page detailing her dowry. the list of linens, silver plate, and coin brought by her father. With a steady hand, she uses the shears to slice the page from the binding. The sound is a sharp tear in the silence of the house. She folds the parchment, tucking it into the bodice of her torn shift against her heart. It is a reclaiming of her worth, a theft of the paper soul he tried to sell. Historical records from the London Consistory Court often reveal this pattern, a spike in correction cases coinciding with periods of economic downturn. Excavations of these narratives show that the morality of the era was often a veneer for asset management. The woman leaves the shears open on the desk, the blade spanning the gap where her history used to be. She slips back into the shadows of the cellar, carrying the truth into the void. A name erased is harder to find than a grave. The sun rises over the ward of Cheap, weak and watery, illuminating a city that has already moved on. Inside the counting house, the husband discovers the violation. He finds the ledger open, the binding stretched, and the jagged edge where the page of the dowry was severed. There is no scream of rage, only a frantic, silent inventory. He dips his quill into the ink pot to reconstruct the numbers, to rewrite the history of his assets on a fresh sheet. But without the original signature, the numbers are ghosts. He stares at the gap in the book, the white space where his salvation was supposed to be written. He picks up the iron shears from the desk. They are cold, heavy, and indifferent. He wipes a smudge of dirt from the blade, perhaps mud from the street, perhaps a trace of her hand, and places them back in the drawer. He locks it. The tool has served its purpose, and now it must be hidden, not because of the violence it inflicted, but because of the truth it represents. The erasure of the woman is absolute. In the parish records of St. Mary Le Bow, her name ceases to appear after that November morning. There is no entry for her burial, no note of her exile. She becomes a blank line in the census of the living. The neighbors who banged the basins and shouted the rough music speak of her only in hushed, distorted whispers. She transforms from a neighbor into a parable, a nameless warning used to frighten young brides into obedience. The specific texture of her life, her voice, her labor, the warmth of her skin, is scrubbed away by the collective need to forget what they did. The door to the house, splintered by the bailiff's boot in the opening hour, has been mended. New timber, pale and unweathered, patches the old oak. It is a scar that will darken with time until it is indistinguishable from the rest of the frame. The mud in the street hardens, trapping the footprints of the mob under a crust of winter frost, waiting to be ground into dust by the wheels of passing carts. The city swallows the event whole. The ledger is closed, the debt is paid. The silence she held in the pillory now fills the house, louder than any accusation. Subscribe, hit the bell, and like. The ink lasts longer than the blood it bought.